The Chusky Boys!
This is Chad with Hemlock. What does a Chusky boy looks like?
Chusky Boys, what's that?
Chusky Boys, not to be confused with Husky Boys.
The Chusky Boys!
I believe y'all guys are listening to the Chusky Boys.
This is William Duvall, and you are listening to The Chusky Boys.
All right, Chusky listeners, we're back from hiatus. Summertime, it's tough to get everybody together, but we're back for episode 24. We have a very special guest. Actually, it was the Sketchy Goat that got all this coordinated, so I'm going to actually turn it over to her so she can do the special introduction. Goat, take it away.
Will do. Okay, so this is the first episode we've had back with a guest, and the guest that we have today is one of the most extraordinary musicians, people, just general, again, human beings that I've ever gotten the pleasure of knowing. He is an award-winning saxophone player. He makes magic. He is a really famed jazz musician, but I think it was someone I heard mention that he plays punk rock jazz. And I think that's one of the coolest ways to describe his music. And we are so happy to have Mr. Frank Catalano sitting with us today talking about a lot of stuff. But one of the first things that I wanted to get down to was your start. Where did Frank Catalano come from, and what was the beginnings of your career like?
Well, that's a good question. Sometimes I feel like I'm from outer space or something, and I don't really blend in too well. But I'm born and raised in Chicago, and I was really attracted to the way the saxophone looked as like a 6-7-year-old kid. I think I was 7. I was probably in like second grade. Our neighbor was selling an alto saxophone at a garage sale, and it was like something she used in marching band, like when she was in high school or something. And I didn't have the money to buy it, and my mom didn't want me to have it. And but I was able to borrow it for a few months, so I kind of taught myself, how to play on some level. And then my mom started renting me one. And I've been playing ever since. I'm 45, so I guess I've been playing for about 38 years. And I can't believe that time has been going by so fast.
I saw someone mention that you are pretty much the John Coltrane energy of the 21st century. I think it's pretty apt.
Yeah, I mean, I don't use it a lot because it seems kind of like being, to me, how do you compare John Coltrane with anybody, or for that matter? But it was Downbeat magazine that said that several years back when they reviewed my Mighty Burner album. And I thought that was nice. And John Coltrane's son, Ravi Coltrane, who's a great saxophone player, we had the same manager for a while, and we're signed to the same record label for a while. And last time I played at Birdland, he came out, and so he seems to like me and I like him, and I hope John Coltrane up in heaven would approve of all that. So,
Frank, did your neighbor ever find out about your, like, afterwards about your success, like how he or she, your first saxophone came from their garage sale?
Yeah, it's funny. That's an awesome question because between Facebook friend requests and other stuff, yeah, definitely 30 some years later, 20 some years later, over this last decade, they've all hit me up in the nicest of ways, and a lot of people. So it makes me feel really good that everybody has been, proud of me, just in the fact that, I like playing with, so many different musicians, and I like playing all types of music. So I was never worried about like trying to go like the ultra famous route, but it's nice that just on a day-to-day level, it seems like somebody's always writing about me, or my albums are doing okay, or something's going on that, people that know me, I've popped up on their radar, and through the magic of social media, it seems like I've been able to keep in touch with everybody, and it's definitely good vibes.
Just real quick, I wanted to bring up some of your first shows because I think your kind of start is really interesting. Tell us a little bit about, because you kind of came off the scene playing with some really big names, especially in jazz. What was that like for you to kind of just jump right into it?
Well, I was pretty lucky because when I was like 13 or so, I started playing in the Elgin Community College, which is about an hour outside of Chicago, in their jazz band. And it had a lot of people that were high school students, had people that were semi-professionals, kind of age range from, I would say, me as the very youngest, all the way up to like Dick Robertson, who became my high school band director, was probably about 60 at the time, or at least in his 50s. So it was a really good environment for me as a 13 or so year old to start playing in. And then they would have guest artists come in who were all, famous, musicians. And then it seemed like whenever they heard me play, they'd start hiring me. And that was a big help to me. So one person in particular, drummer Louie Bellson, was very famous. His wife was Pearl Bailey, who was very famous and who more or less discovered Tony Bennett back in the day and all this stuff. So having him start hiring me as a young person, about 14 years old, and introducing me to basically everybody, because Louie Bellson was pretty much jazz royalty. And so him in and of itself, not only like being the nicest guy ever and legendary drummer, but he just, helped me out so much. And it kind of just, even just took off from there. So I've never, other than doing like some landscaping jobs and stuff as like a 10, 12, 13-year-old, by the time I was 14 or 15, I was able to make a decent living from just playing the saxophone, and I've never done anything else. And Tony Bennett, started hiring me when I was about 17, and I met him, through Louie Bellson. And then it just, just kind of went on from there. I got signed to Delmark Records when I was 18, and, did a string of recordings with them. Trumpet player Randy Brecker, who's, won like a dozen Grammys, has played with everybody. He was one of the guest artists when I was in high school, and he took a liking to me and wrote my kind of like college letter of recommendation. And I was the first Catalano to go to college, and I had a lot of scholarship offers. So I did go to school, and I went to DePaul University. And I just remember my mom still hoping I wouldn't be a musician for my career path. And she's like, well, you could be like a doctor or a lawyer because you get good grades. And I'm like, well, it's a music scholarship. She's like, yeah, well, can't you do some of that and then, become a lawyer too on the side? And I'm like, no. So now we laugh about it. But my teenage years were really difficult. I was having fun playing, but I was trying to juggle like going to high school and then going to college while touring and performing, 6-7 days a week. And then also it did take a minute for specifically my mom to kind of come around with the idea of being a musician. And now she's very proud of me and happy. But I would say for any young musicians out there, especially if you're between 15 and 20, I would say those are really tough times because you have family members maybe steering you in different directions. And, so I would just say to anybody, you have to kind of just really follow your heart. And if you really feel dedicated to it, just find a way to make it work. And if you don't, that's totally cool too. Because if you don't feel 100% about it, then give yourself a little time. I happen to feel like 110% about it out of the gate. So it caused a lot of arguments and problems and stuff within my family. And then, there's dangerous parts too, because like I couldn't really drive until I was 16 or so. But then like I'm playing these gigs and I'm on tour and I would have to lie about my age and say I was 18 or 19. I'm 45. Wikipedia and a lot of online sources say I'm 50. And I just remember when I joined Tony Bennett's band, I remember having to lie and say I was about 5 years older than I was for legalities because they wanted people that were 21 so you could, play wherever. And so I was, I think, 16 or 17. So a lot of online sources say I'm 5 years older. I've actually sent in my driver's license, my passport, all types of stuff. I think Wikipedia might have just changed it, but like Google and all these other things, because you
lied so well.
It's just crazy to me that but that's truly what happened when I was like 16. I was just kind of like, here we go. And I'm doing this. But it was kind of dangerous because, you're like maybe 14, 15, 16, and you're being driven around by somebody who just finished a performance who's twice your age, who then maybe drank a ton of booze, maybe is doing some drugs, and then they're driving you around to the next gig or whatever. I just remember being like in Detroit one time, and I was like about 15, and I was playing in a rock band. And so the punk rock jazz thing comes because I love Coltrane and very traditional jazz, Lesser Young and all the old school guys, but I love all types of music. And, if you were born in 1977, let's say like me, I wasn't born in 1927, where the new music of the 40s or 30s would have been jazz. That stuff had already been going on for a long time. So like for me, starting to listen to music in the 80s, I think, Def Leppard, I had my Def Leppard shirt rocking. I had the Pyromania CD rocking the whole time. So like for me, all my influences.
Rock and roll jazz here.
It's music that I liked. So to me, also artistically, I've had some people like jazz purists, almost bash me because they think maybe I play too energetically at times or whatever. So at my concert last night, we played a cool place near Madison, Wisconsin, and it totally sold out. And you could hear a pin drop, and it's outside and tons of people. So it's like I'll play a very quiet, pretty ballad and be very emotional, but then I'll be like, well, let's throw down and rock it out and make sure it's high energy for the next one. And it all works well. But yeah, unfortunately, in all areas of music, but especially jazz, and especially 20 some years ago when I was making my first albums, the idea of jazz critics was very popular. Now, most of them, I don't know if there's even that many around anymore, but there used to be tons. Every newspaper, every magazine, there wasn't cool podcasts like we're doing. It was like this famous magazine, New York Times, Chicago Tribune, you go down the list, they all had their critic person. And a lot of those people were very supportive of me and super cool. But I noticed once I stopped playing more traditional jazz, because I would say my first 3 albums were, I'm very proud of them, but they were definitely more in the traditional jazz, bebop jazz idiom. Once I started doing stuff like my Mighty Burner album, which sold a bunch and was on the Billboard charts for 20 weeks and was very successful for me, they started like bashing me. So it was weird. They either took a side being like, hey, Frank's already done these things and now is looking forward to expanding and doing some different things. And all my favorite artists, Herbie Hancock, Miles Davis, they didn't just keep playing the same thing over and over. But I do know at that point, the punk rock jazz was either a great thing and it brought new people to check me out, or was a bad thing and made like the purest people, even without ever hearing me play, go like, oh, well, Frank plays this kind of like high energy jazz and, I don't want to listen to it. Ironically, every day now that 20 some years has gone by, I get like younger people and newer bands sending me nice messages and stuff saying, hey, I was listening to you 20 years ago and you've influenced my playing. So that makes me, pretty happy. But I would say that those early years, probably like when I was a teenager into early 20s, those for me were probably in some ways the most kind of spontaneous, exciting times for me, because I was just trying out stuff. I was doing all these gigs with famous people, but I was leading my own bands at tons of clubs like the Green Mill and, Andy's and all these, iconic jazz clubs that I love. And it was just a really great time. And I didn't realize how much those years were then going to influence the whole rest of my life too. So when I think back on that stuff, I was just in full, speed, like full steam ahead kind of mode. But they were really great times, and I'm glad I made it out alive, because truly some of the people I was hanging out with, I probably shouldn't have been, but that's a whole nother question, I guess.
With all of that amazing like life that you've had up to that point, how have you never or have you ever wanted to kind of just stop, just kind of give it up? Or has this always been a driving force of yours where you have to create somehow at all times?
I just really feel like, I've written a lot of songs. That's ultimately what my degree was in, was classical composition. And I've always loved writing songs, but I'm fine with not writing songs for a while. I'm fine with like not worrying about making a new album for a while. But what I'm not fine with is not being able to play the saxophone, because I just feel like, you know, it's such just like a part of me. You put air through it, and it really is like you're breathing, and it's different than say playing the piano or guitar, which are awesome. And I'm a bad piano player, but the whole thing about the wind instrument where you're really like breathing life in it and stuff, that's just something like during the whole pandemic shutdown stuff, that was such a bummer for me, just like you know, for my soul, because I'm just so used to being out there playing and throwing down, and you can practice and stuff, and that's great. And, you know, it helps keep some proficiency and chops up and all that. But it's not the same as when you feel the audience's energy and the band is, you know, killing it behind you, and you feel all their energy and you're putting a lot of energy back out. It's just a whole different thing.
How many months were you locked down then from COVID?
I mean, I was flying back on March 12th, my birthday of 2020, from New York, and I had just done some concerts there. And that was like the official first day of the pandemic. I remember I was out at dinner the night before with my friend Andrea from D'Addario, and who makes my saxophone reeds. And like our phone started going off, like one of those Amber Alert things. And it's like official pandemic. And we're like, uh-oh, what exactly does this mean? So like, I just remember we got totally, like, we drank a lot. And I had a lot of Drambuie cocktails for sure. And then we kind of like, we're like, uh-oh, well, what does this mean? And then I flew home the next day, back to Chicago. I have a condo in New York where I was spending like maybe, I would say, a third of my time. And then the house in Chicago where I'm at now, I would spend probably a third of my time, and then probably traveling a third of the time. So, you know, I came back to Chicago, and I didn't go back to New York for like almost a year. And yeah, I guess, you know, if you figure like March of 2020, I was doing a gig at Dorian's in Chicago, I think March 15th. And that's when they announced the formal shutdown. They almost closed up the place during the middle of my show, almost like at midnight.
It's like Get Out, like right in the middle of it.
And all these people from the city came in, the owner came in, and they started talking. And mine was the very last concert. And, you know, I got done maybe like at 1 a.m. And I was like at midnight, all these people came in like from the city. And then it was like a day or so later, I think they wanted to close stuff down before St. Patrick's Day. So it was like really the next day, everything was just closed. So I would say, you know, mid-March,
you were the grand finale of jazz in that regard.
It was funny because I did like this kind of TV show thing for Chicago Independent Venue League Civil, and we did it at Dorian's, and we did it almost a year later, like at the very end of 2020, like maybe 9 months later, and my name was still on the marquee inside and everything. It's just like, it was like the next day, it was just like they were
like
just
a real life ghost
done.
town. Yeah.
It was like
post-apocalyptic.
It was like if you saw the Titanic 9 months after it sank versus like these like 70-year-old 100-year-old movies. But yeah, it was very creepy feeling. But you know, I'm glad that has at least I feel, I don't want to like jinx anything, but I feel like we're out of the woods with all that, and I hope there's no more shutdowns and crazy stuff going on. But yeah, I would just say, obviously, in addition to like finances, you know, you can't go out and perform and all that stuff, but even beyond, you know, the lack of income from concerts, it just truly, it was like my soul was just like, what do you do? So I tried to do a few home concerts for Drambuie, who's one of my sponsors, and some people, and they paid me for those, and I appreciated it, and it was fun. But by like the third or fourth one, I'm just like, wow, this you know, that not being able to play in front of people is horrible, and like not having my band behind me is horrible. So yeah, if
jazz seems to really be built off of audience response and your vibe with, because your songs are amazing, but they always sound different no matter, like, depending on who you're playing with. They're like interpreted different ways. So at home jazz seems like kind of a weird phrasing in itself.
Yeah, I totally agree, because it's like at home, one person, one man band kind of jazz, which isn't my vibe, you know, and that is what's so special about, you know, really great jazz standards. I feel a handful of songs I've written, I feel this way about, where you could play them 1,000 times, at least I could play them 1,000 times and never get tired of them. And they never sound the same, you know, in that 1,000 times do it. Cause, you know, even if you have the same musicians in your band, you know, I'm in a different mood one day, maybe it's a different tempo, maybe somebody switches it up, but certainly, like, let's say, like, last night my drummer Kurt plays one way, and then last month at Birdland, New York, Jeff Tane Watts, awesome drummer, playing, he plays a totally different way. And then of course Jimmy Chamberlain, he plays a different way. So the whole vibe gets changed up there. You know, many people, you know, I could probably play the same song, you know, with those three different drummers. And even a reasonably educated person, if you just, like, you know, took some snippets of it, might not even think that it was the same song at all. So that always keeps it exciting and creative for me. But yeah, to your point, it just, you know, all that just stopped for about 1.5 years. So
speaking of playing with some incredible people, tell us a little bit about that, because you have recorded and performed with a really stellar cast of players. So if you could let us in on that some.
I mean, this last couple of weeks was super fun. I know we've talked about this, but yeah, the Smashing Pumpkins fundraiser for the 4th of July Highland Park shooting, you know, I played on the concerts and then the live stream,
which was amazing.
It was so great. And Perry Farrell from Jane's Addiction, you know, kind of closed it out with Jane Says, and I had fun playing, you know, saxophone part, and I saw the video, and, you know, like, he's like scat singing and I'm playing back and forth. I mean, it was so fun. And Billy Corgan, of course, you know, killing it on the guitar, and Jimmy Chamberlain, my longtime friend and, you know, bandmate of, I guess we've done 4 or 5 albums together and so many concerts, you know, he crushed it as always, and I can go on and on. But I mean, like, so that was a super fun thing just in this, you know, last couple of weeks. And then, of course, you know, I'm very good friends with the guys in Violent Femmes. John, the drummer, used to be my drummer in my regular jazz quartet. So I play with them pretty regularly. And years back, Les Claypool, I was Ballpark Frank in Les Claypool's Frog Brigade band. So that was super fun. And then, of course, the jazz guys, you know, like, you know, Tony Bennett, that was always a great experience. And I wish I would have played with him longer, whether it was in a big band setting or a small group, just kind of hearing phrasing and stuff like that as a young person. It's so helped with all the jazz standards, and, you know, definitely made me a much better player. And of course, like the great drummers that I got to play with as a young person, like Louie Bellson, who I mentioned, Barrett Deems, who was Louis Armstrong's drummer. I recorded on his last album before he passed away. And I think I would have been 18 or 19 at the time, and he was about 90. So he really was over 70 years older. He was a generation older than my grandparents. So that's another thing where just, I do feel very lucky that I did get some, like, firsthand experience with those, you know, people from the very, very beginning of jazz, who, if they were still alive, and they're not, but would be, you know, 110, 120 years old almost now. I think Barrett would be well over 100. So, you know, all that. And then John Coltrane's drummer, Elvin Jones, I got to play with him a little bit, who's just, you know, you can't even put that into words, really. And
I had no idea you played with Elvin Jones. That's amazing. That is really cool.
There's a duo recording of us that I'm pretty good friends with Elvin's son, Nathan, and he had messaged me, you know, real nice way about, yeah, let's see if we can, you know, find a way to get it commercially released. And I'm like, yeah, I would like that very much. So, so yeah, there's still all these cool things from over 20 years ago that might be resurfacing. Delmark Records just re-released my very first album, Cut It Out, and that's 25 years old now. And they have other recordings from that session. Trumpet player Ira Sullivan played on that, who amazing, and who, you know, used to play with Charlie Parker in the early 50s. So again, like, just legendary guy. And, so I still think some stuff that I recorded as a young person is still going to be making its way out 20, 30 some years later. But yeah, all these things are just experiences that not only can I not really put into words, but again, I was just so lucky to have these things. And
didn't you have a run-in with Britney Spears at some point too?
Not really. I got some death threat hate mail from a person who said that I got basically his record deal because the Sony umbrella, had Britney Spears and some other people, and they ended up signing me for the jazz roster. And there was some like trade publications that were mentioning me and Britney Spears together, but we had nothing to do with each other or anything. But this one particular guy started sending me just like these like hate mail things, and basically was like somehow equating me with Britney Spears and saying that I stole his record deal. And obviously this person was just crazy, but they kept going and just, so yeah, but that was more or less the only thing to do with Britney Spears. I don't know her. I'm sure she's an awesome person, but ironically, yeah, that weird situation came about.
It's a pretty cutthroat industry.
Well, jazz shouldn't be cutthroat because it's supposed to be an artistic music, and unlike a Britney Spears who maybe sold 100 million copies of her recordings and had hundreds of millions of dollars come in, maybe even over the billion mark, that's a lot of money. But for a jazz person, those dollar amounts are nowhere near that. So it is surprising that it would be so cutthroat when we're not even talking about large dollar amounts, at least by comparison. And nowadays, it just seems like a lot of jazz musicians that are younger and somewhat successful, a lot of them that I've met, came from pretty wealthy backgrounds anyway, because their parents bought them all these expensive instruments. Their parents paid for them to go to Berkeley, or a quality school for 4 or 6 years or whatever, and it's very expensive. So one person, I think he's maybe like in his mid-20s, and a quality New York player, and was hanging around me a lot and whatnot. And I met his family a little bit, and I was just like, wow, I would have just suggested, if you had it to do over, keep that $400,000 that your parents spent to send you to college, go buy a condo or do something, and just, become a better player and like sit in with everybody and hang out with people, get a teacher. And the guy just started crying. So that's when I realized, wow, if you're going to cry because I said that to you, then you don't have really the backbone to get out there and play. Because I remember specifically in Charles Erlin's band, who was a very legendary Hammond B3 organ player and great player. The first time I played with him, he's like, "Frank, man, you suck." And he just saying I sucked. Like he just kept like saying it. And I didn't know any of the songs he was calling because they were like his original songs. And I'm like,
you
17.
need to know these without any background or anything.
It was the weirdest thing because I heard him on the radio in Chicago, WDCB radio. It's still a jazz station, and it's a great station. And I know, all the DJs, and they're nice people. They were playing this recording of Charles Erlin. And I was in high school. I had no idea who he was. I just knew I liked the music. Well, he was a bit older, had some very successful like platinum records and stuff, but I didn't know this. So I actually went to sit in with him at Andy's Jazz Club, and I was having fun. I sat in with the band before him, and he was walking in, and he asked me for my card and said that I sounded really good. So I gave him my card because I had little business cards printed up and whatnot. And this, unfortunately, this is way before the internet or Facebook. So if you didn't have somebody's number, it was just hard to get a hold of somebody. So he asked me for my number, and then his saxophone player didn't show up. And I stayed and I asked if I could sit in with them, and I did. And it went great just by ear. I liked how all my solos sounded. I was able to fit in with some melody parts. You know, he was playing the melody on the right hand of the organ, and I was doing some just kind of like background, like little horn parts that I was coming up with, and it worked great. And instead of sitting on a song or two, I played the whole rest of the night with them. And the owner, Scott of Andy's, came up to me. He's like, "You're awesome. Would you like to start playing here?" And I don't know,
Just insert yourself in.
It was awesome. So then the next gig we did, Charles kind of hired me on the spot. And then the next gig we did, for whatever reason, he hated every single thing I did. And so I'm like, oh man, I'm never going to play with him again. And I felt really bad. And then he called me up maybe like 3 months later and just said like, hey, I've got all these gigs for you. But I'm just like, well, you said that I sucked and you didn't like my playing.
Was he drunk or something?
He could have been drunk, but I didn't know. I just didn't know the melodies and I didn't know the songs. So I just said, well, do you have some music? Or, you know, like I'll bring a music stand.
Any kind of guide whatsoever.
He was so mad because then I realized he didn't read music and he didn't have any music. So he's like, well, just go buy my albums. And I'm like, well, okay, I'll go over to Tower Records where I used to be at like every other day listening to stuff. You're all probably too young, but they used to have the listening stations like at the end of the aisles. And I would try to listen to stuff and or buy it. But I was just like, okay, tell me which ones. And he just goes, all of them. And then hangs up the phone. So
memorize this discography or else.
You know, I go to Tower Records and, you know, I really am like 17 or so. And, you know, CDs and stuff, even back then were like $16, $17, especially if they're the ones that weren't super common. They just seemed like they would charge you more. So I look in the Charles Erland section, you know, it had like 40 albums. And I'm just like, I don't have that much money. I had like enough money on me to buy like 2, but like, you know, and back then $17 or whatever, let's just say in like 1994 or something, whenever this was, you know, I'm not sure what that would translate in today's money, but probably like $50 because money went a lot further back then. So I'm just like thinking to myself, this guy's like paying me about $50 a gig and he wants me to then like spend what I don't even know for all those. It'd be probably like, you know, $1,000 to buy.
He's a genius.
So I'm like, yeah, I thought he was just completely just fucking with me. I didn't even know what to think. And then, but he was dead serious. And then I'm like, again, I show up and I'm ill prepared. And so I'm like, listen, you got to tell me, you know, if you want me to be in your band and I would like to be in your band, you got to like, tell me what songs that you need me to learn. And like, I'm like, I need like maybe 20 to focus on. And that would be a good start. And then if there's some gaps, I'll learn all the other ones along the way. And he gave me a list of like 20 songs. I wrote them down. Sure enough, the next gig, he didn't play one of those 20, even though I had just learned them. And the guitar player, Bobby Broom, who's very famous, you know, he's for many years played with Miles Davis and Sonny Rollins and is a great player. And he just started laughing when I said that. And he's like, yeah, he does that. Meaning like, I still don't know if he was just completely like, in a really old school way, just completely just messing with me. Or if again, yeah, mentally there was some disconnect and he didn't remember what he said.
That was the don't play list. It was the reverse list.
It really was. But I ended up being his, you know, in his band for the next 4 years until he passed away. And I recorded with him on a really famous kind of important recording that was done live at the DeSable Museum. And it had Johnny Hammond Smith, Jimmy McGriff, Dr. Lonnie Smith, all famous Ham B3 organ players. So he would say that I sucked, but then he would keep hiring me. And then I would say probably after about a year, then he was complimentary. But it really took like a year and probably like 70, 80, 90 gigs of just being like berated after every one before he started liking me. So just in a long-winded way, this is what a lot of old school guys, you know, did. And it was their way of, I don't know really what it was. Like nowadays it would be
training
considered
you really fast.
Yeah. Well, nowadays it would probably be like just off the charts, like considered, like some type of emotional abuse. Yeah, I mean, yeah, but back then it was kind of commonplace. The really truly great jazz people of that time, like the Louie Bellsons and stuff, if they didn't like what you were doing, but they liked you as a person and they liked your playing, they'd be so cool and they say, hey, do you mind trying this or that? And they were always very awesome. But like the kind of like true old school, like small club kind of like down and dirty kind of mentality was just to be mean, throw a drumstick at the back of somebody's head. I saw that, and luckily it wasn't me, but I was just like, man, this is pretty brutal. So I just can't imagine that stuff going on nowadays. But yeah, it was definitely pretty vicious, in some ways.
I was just about to ask, speaking of vicious stories, and you don't have to name names explicitly, but have you had any really gnarly experiences with people to where you're like, I don't care how famous or good you are, I can't do this. This is one of the weirdest and worst experiences of my career. It's not going to happen.
I never had to like express it. I've had it happen a lot. Early on, the band Ministry asked me to play a few things, and they're like a cool industrial rock band. But yeah, it was just the vibe-wise was going to be like not happening. And but I like them. And it was funny. A couple weeks ago, Billy Corgan pulled me aside, and we just had a really fun chat. And he was talking about all types of stuff. And just kind of also like in a simple way, sometimes you can just feel at the end of a concert that you have to leave right away, because you can feel like maybe somebody's going to corner you and ask you a million questions as more of like a fan, which is okay, but it gets weird. And sometimes somebody might corner you and ask you to play on all these types of recordings and gigs that you don't want to do. So
like wanting
I think
something from you at all times. And
there's
too much
a ton of that. So without like naming people specifically, it was ironic to me that somebody like Billy, who's, sold, 50 million records and all that stuff, we'd have a kind of fun talk like that, just because like I could tell I was going to have to leave the one concert sooner than I normally would, but it was getting to the point where I was almost feeling uncomfortable, even though everyone was super nice. And that actually happened last night at my concert, where I did stay and I did talk to everybody, because I like to talk to everybody that's there. But then it took an extra 3 hours, and then they had to kick everybody out. And then I've got a 3-hour drive coming back to Chicago from the area of Wisconsin that I was playing in. And then so today, if I didn't maybe get to sleep until like 4 or 5 in the morning, and then, outside people are like honking horns and then you get woken up at like 8 or 9 in the morning, you're just fried. But going back to your original point of like any type of really crazy stuff or whatever, I feel like I've been able to, without having to say it to people, just maybe like by saying like, no, I'm, really, tied up for the next 6 months. And unfortunately, sometimes that's been the case where I really have been traveling for an extended period of time. It was something I really wanted to do, but wasn't able to. But I feel like I really haven't ever had to like, be nasty back to anybody or anything.
People aren't
like that.
Overstaying their welcome in vast amounts, basically.
That is one thing that even when they're super nice people and they mean well, that happens a lot, especially when people have a few drinks in them. There was a nice person, Sona and I were walking to dinner, and a really nice guy came up and started, just saying that he'd seen me play a bunch of times. I've never met this person before, but he's super nice. And especially from a couple weeks ago, tons of people saw online the Smashing Pumpkins stream, and they were super nice and mentioned me and all these things. And, so that alone, quite a few people have just truly like walking down the street, stopped me and started talking with me and stuff. But it was like after like 10 minutes, and I'm trying to be very friendly, and he was a super nice guy.
I think it's important really quickly to mention that you are one of the nicest people. And like everyone says that about you. You're always very nice and considerate, and you do stay till pretty much everyone leaves the club. So it's hard to kind of push you to be mean because it just doesn't happen always. You're like the nicest person ever.
I love people. I like meeting new people. I like making new friends. And like, even like when we were hanging out in Bloomington, after the show, we were like the last people to leave because it's fun. And I appreciate people coming to the show. And I'm not one of those people that just kind of like try to hide out backstage and not say hi. I like to meet everybody. But I've noticed more recently,
there's a limit.
Because it's actually been hurting my ability then to function properly the next day. So if I got a recording session the next day or a concert the next day, or even just need to do some, like very basic stuff, what it's doing is keeping me from getting sleep, because you stay an extra few hours and maybe everybody's nice, but maybe one person says something weird that is like kind of bugging you, and then it's kind of going in your mind. I don't know, but I kind of decided recently, with still being friendly, because I don't think anyone should ever be unfriendly, but maybe just making a point to leave sooner and whatnot might be better for myself.
Safe boundaries.
That's a good way to put it, just because I think that these are things, as I get older, I'm still learning. I think with most people, if they live to be 100, if they're open-minded and they're a cool person, they're going to learn new stuff every day. Some people, I think, make it a point to not try or not learn anything new. And I know some of those people too. But I know for me, now that I'm getting a little bit older, it's also like, well, how do I better take care of myself? And getting more sleep. I've tried to change around how I eat a little bit. I still like martinis, but like, especially this last month, I'm like, okay, I'm just going to kind of back it down, and just be reasonable. I was especially happy coming out of COVID to be out and be able to, do some partying and hanging and stuff like that. But then I'm like, okay, well, setting boundaries, like you're saying, is something that I'm doing more now than ever for myself, but it also means how I interact with people. And it also, going back to like the original question that, prompted this conversation, it's like, if somebody does say something weird, I think it's okay to just immediately say, wow, well, that's pretty uncool, and take care, have a good night, and just be done. And I did that recently, and it just made this person so mad. And then I just had to say, listen, I have nothing against you, but I have no interest in continuing to speak with you, and, take care. And
so I don't polite.
I just think that's the proper way to handle it. And nobody has the right to force you to be anywhere, and nobody has the right to force you to speak with them. And if somebody feels that they do, then it just means something's really wrong with that person. And there's nothing you're going to do to get out of that situation, except for maybe physically remove yourself and be like, I'm out,
That's a good life rule.
So Frank, speaking of standing up for yourself, you were 18 years old in the mid 90s. You said your mom wasn't quite on board with your career choice. You signed your first contract. Like, how difficult was that? Like, did you have an agent or a lawyer or something like that? Or did you do it on your own?
Honestly, Dusty, that's like a awesome question, because this kind of made me very mad for a while at my whole family situation. My dad was pretty out of the picture at that point. So my mom and I were pretty close. But my mom just wanted nothing, no part of this. So I basically, on my own, I went to Delmark Studios, and Bob Kester, who owned the company and who signed me, he discovered Buddy Guy, Junior Wells, Sun Ra, all of their first albums. Bob Kester signed them to Delmark, and so I was pretty honored to be part of that thing. And my car had gotten towed because I didn't realize that I had put it in a tow zone. And then I was more worried about trying to get my car, like back from where it was. Finally, I ended up, walking like 4 miles. And I got to the Delmark studio as they were locking up at 5 o'clock. I was supposed to be there at like 2. And Bob was walking out. If I would have gotten there, not kidding, like 30 seconds later, and I and he felt I'd blown him off, I'm sure I wouldn't have gotten signed. So he's like, wow, you're really late. Better late than never, though, I guess. Come on in. So we went in. He gave me a contract. I didn't have any lawyer look it over, nothing. And I should have, but you know what? It was a very simple contract, and I feel like I can read okay. And I read the whole thing, and it took a while, but there was nothing that seemed that out of place. And also, again, it wasn't for tons of money. I mean, it was for me at the time, quite a bit of money because I had very little. And also back then, you couldn't just go into a studio and put your music on iTunes or Apple Music or Spotify or, one of these things. Like that didn't exist. So you would have had to, if you wanted to self-produce an album, you would have had the money to press up all the CDs. You would have had to have the money to pay all the musicians. You would have had the money to go in the studio. You would have had to have some money for promotion. So to me, he said we on average invest about $50,000 into, each album we put out, between paying the musicians, studio time, the PR, having them pressed. So they did all that. Plus we're paying me. I was just so excited. But going back to your question, I had no help from any family member. I had no help from any attorney. I had no help from anybody. It was just me. And that made me, I think, very resilient in a way. But it also, I think, for the next few years, made me a little resentful because I would have liked some help and I would have liked some guidance.
Like you're just a kid at that point.
Yeah. And I really didn't know anything, but maybe in a weird way, that's what helped me, because I know so many musicians that have sabotaged their career there's tons of great musicians that I will never, ever fucking work with again, because maybe I hire them for something. And then after the fact, like after the gig's over or after the recording session's over, and everything's happened that we agreed to, they want more money or they want other things. And it's really because they're having a bad month or need the money. It's not because it's owed to them. It's one thing if something's owed to somebody and you agree with that. But a lot of people do weird stuff. And a lot of really wonderful musicians have, kind of ruined their own careers or sabotaged themselves by not behaving well. Bob Kester passed away maybe about 4 or 5 years ago. But I remember him telling me when he signed me, he's like, okay, this is great. And let's go out to dinner. And it couldn't have been nicer. But he's like, I can tell that you're going to be a real pain in the butt to deal with in a few years. And I remember it stuck with me. But sure enough, I guess he was right, because then when the contract came up to be renewed, I asked for a lot more stuff. And he said no. And then I signed on to another record label. And then as soon as I did that, his wife actually called me and said, Bob would like to apologize and we really want you back. And I'm like, well, I want Bob to get right. But you know what's funny? I was kind of an asshole, to be honest. But it wasn't for no reason. It's because I realized that the album that I did for them, which helped get my music off the ground, it got so much good press and it actually sold quite well. It didn't it wasn't Britney Spears numbers, but that's
the new thing.
That's gonna be my new. But it did pretty well. So I just said I need to get paid better if I'm going to do another album. So I had already committed to do the first one, which was called Cut It Out, and then the one with Randy Brecker, and then Bob shelved that one. And that is what opened me up, because he basically dropped me. He didn't drop me because I still technically owed them 2 more records, because the contract was for 3 records that I signed. But by shelving me, and he put, I think it was about a year clause. If they didn't release it within a year, I had the right then to go to another record label. And that was in that first contract. And I read that, and I had been warned by other people. There was a singer named Jimmy Scott who got signed to a lifetime contract, which is what they used to have in the 40s and 50s. And if the record label wanted to shelve you, it meant the end of your career. And they would do this to people in hopes of then another record label coming to them to buy that contract. And it was actually Sheryl Crow and a few other people that really fought hard to make the legal limit of how long you could be under a record deal at 7 years. So 7 years was the worst case scenario, or best case scenario if it goes well, but worse if they shelve you, because that means
had him out.
Yeah, at least the worst case scenario is at 7 years. So I kind of had through the years heard these horror stories, and I noticed Delmark's was only 1 year. So I'm like, actually 1 year is pretty fair. And I kind of thought while I'm in Bob's office, I'm like, well, if I was him, I'd also want to know that there was an exclusive contract between me and him, because what if I then the next day went ahead and signed another record deal and 2 albums are coming out at the same time from 2 different companies? And again, it was so different, in the mid 90s, because there wasn't any internet. Like what we're doing now wouldn't have even been thought of. I wouldn't have thought of
freedom.
I mean, this is awesome and I love it. But it was not the way of things back then. So the fact that it was a fair amount of money that they were paying me, and they were paying for all other expenses, and I was, at the worst case scenario, if they did shelve me, I was only tied down for a year. So I signed it, and I'm glad I did. But it is interesting because Bob did then the next album. I suggested Randy Brecker, who I had met at Elgin Community College and who had wrote my college letter of recommendation. And his brother, Mike Brecker, is probably regarded as like, one of the best saxophone players ever. And they had the band Brecker Brothers. And I can go on and on how much I love and respect both of them. Randy agreed to do it. So we go and do the recording session. And I thought it was great. And then Bob said that he didn't like it. So he's the owner. So he has the ability to say, I don't like this and I'm not releasing it. And that's what he did. So for a year, I couldn't do anything. And then I, with Randy Brecker, basically re-recorded the same album that I was going to, release on Delmark, but for a different label named Lakeside. And they were also super cool. They paid for everything. They paid me. They paid to fly in Randy, and it was successful. So that made Bob mad. So then Bob's like, well, you still owe me 2 records, and I want one of them to be with Randy Brecker. And I'm like, okay. And I'm like, well, I'm going to be doing the Chicago Jazz Festival with Von Freeman, legendary saxophone player, who was one of my mentors. I'm like, I'd like if we could. Is
that what led to you talking to me?
Exactly. Verbatim. The album You Talking to Me, I mean, it's been through several pressings. It's one of Von's only, he did a handful of 2 tenor albums, but the fact that I was like 60 years younger than him and other things, it got a lot of buzz at the time, a lot of nice write-ups, a lot of radio play. And it was very successful for Delmark. And, it's still one of their better selling jazz releases, even according to the new owners. That was helpful without question. That's what led to it.
Yeah, I was going to say, what led from that into like Bang and Explosion and stuff? Moving on from that record too.
Just again, talking about old school record things, I agreed to go back to Delmark, and then Bob renegotiated the contract because I was out of contract now because he had shelved me for the year. So basically I didn't have to do anything, but he paid me a lot better. And wanted the album with Randy Brecker. And I said, let's do one with Randy, but let's first do this one with Von. So we did the You Talking to Me with Von Freeman. And then about a year after that, we did it with Randy. And instead of doing a studio album, I said to Bob, I would prefer to do a live one because I hadn't done a live record yet. And at this point, I had done Cut It Out for Delmark. I had done Pins and Needles for Lakeside that had Randy Brecker on it. I had done You Talking to Me with Von Freeman. And I liked the studio album we did, but I liked the live performance at Chicago Jazz Festival and some other stuff more. And it just had better energy. Again, in the 90s, I mean, yeah, it was great. But in the 90s, it was very difficult to do a quality sounding live record. And so they owned Riverside Studios, which were Delmark Studios. So it was essentially free to them to have me go in the studio. but it was going to cost a lot of money to go do the live album. And so Bob said no to the live album for me and Vaughn. And I put my foot down for me and Randy. I'm like, I want to do it at the Green Mill or somewhere, because I just thought the live energy better captured what I prefer in my playing. And truly, there was 2 semi trucks parked outside of the Green Mill. They're running in all these cables. I mean, because like now I could pick up this laptop, and if it had some type of Pro Tools software, some interface, I could go record anything I want. That was just not the case back then, and it was expensive. So that's the reason why my 4th album, which was with Randy Brecker and Live at the Green Mill, that one I finally got to do the live one. But the original intent for You Talking to Me was to be live, either at the Chicago Jazz Festival or the Green Mill or somewhere, because I just felt like me and Vaughn played really well together live. And I liked the album, and I'm proud of the album we did, but it doesn't have the same energy as when we play live. Maybe that's not a bad thing, because I know some of the live albums, like the one that's just coming out live at Birdland, well, I love that energy. I think that's where the punk rock jazz kind of thing comes in, because a lot of traditional people, they like things to be a little more smooth and mellow. And at least for me, with the exception of maybe a couple of ballads, the live thing where I'm feeding off the energy from the crowd, it's just, a lot of, for me, more fun. And it's definitely way more in your face.
I was just about to real quick bring up your other albums too. Like, I've told you this before. I remember being in high school and just playing like God's Gonna Cut You Down over and over, like at lunch or whenever I could possibly listen to it. And it was my favorite thing. How did like God's Gonna Cut You Down and all the way up to like Tokyo Number 9 and stuff? How did those come about? Because they're so different from, like what you said, like your work with like Von Freeman and whatnot. How did those end up happening? Of course, this is all leading up to Live at Birdland, because the new album is just amazing.
No, these are great questions, and it's in some ways it's easy to answer. Some ways it's difficult to answer, because so many things happened leading up to the way these albums came about.
It's like you can hear that.
I mean, I haven't listened to them like from like beginning to end, like, in their like order of recording
in succession.
Yeah. And I would like to at some point. I'm purposely holding off because I don't want to jinx something or put something in my head, but that I don't want. But I will say it kind of goes back to being friends with Jimmy Chamberlain, because about 20 years ago ish, we were planning on doing a record that we never did, but I was going over to his house and playing a lot. And then like fast forward like a decade, and our mutual friend Joey Bush is like, hey, I'm having a birthday party, can you make it? And I'm like, sure. And Jimmy was there, and we started talking, and he wasn't in the Smashing Pumpkins at that time. And, had a lot more free time. And I'm just like, well, I've been playing with bass player Percy Jones, and, we're planning on doing a duo album. But if you were up for playing drums, that would be like so cool. And immediately he's like, yeah, I'd love to. And Jimmy liked Percy Jones a lot, because Percy Jones is the bass player on a lot of Brian Eno albums, the band Brand X. Phil Collins and Percy Jones started Brand X together like in the 70s, like way before, or maybe early 70s. I don't even know for sure, but
super inventive kind of atmospheric explosion. Yeah.
Yeah. Percy's awesome. And, if it would have just been a duo of me and Percy, more like a little bit more avant-garde kind of atmosphere-based music.
Experimental.
Yeah, that is very experimental. That was what I originally had in mind. And I think that would have been awesome. We just ended up not going that direction. We added Jimmy, and then it kind of took on a kind of a different, like experimental, but still kind of in the pocket jazz thing. And then I added my friend Chris Poland, who played in Megadeth for a long time, and again took even on a more of a different direction. And then Jimmy's like, oh, let's ask Adam from Kneebody, which is also kind of experimental. And that's what led to our Love Supreme collective album, which was the first album that me and Jimmy did together. So that had one vibe that so many people have really liked. But again, I also know some people didn't feel it was like mainstream enough. So everyone has their own opinions, but I like that because I feel like if everything is too down the middle and everyone says, oh yeah, I enjoyed your music, that kind of like is a telltale, even if it's in a nice way, that it sucks. Because, you know, it would be like the Olive Garden or the Chili's or, you know, Applebee's of music then. Meaning like, it's okay. You can go and eat there. You can have fun, but it's not like super badass. So at least that's how I see it. So when everyone kind of thinks something's pretty good, it's dangerous. So I'd much rather have somebody say, man, that was just so fucking awesome, Frank. And the next guy say, man, Frank, that was horrible. Because then at least I feel like it's really resonating with some people. And then maybe it's not resonating with some others. But so
more straightforward that way.
You know, but ironically, that's what Love Supreme Collective did. It had some really great reviews and it had some really bad reviews. And it had some people that like truly like radio DJs that are like, this is the most amazing thing I've heard in 20 years. You know, can I do an interview? And then other people like just that said, Frank, man, this is horrible. You know, it doesn't even sound, you know, like a proper record. You know, it was like, you suck. Why would you bother messing with, you know, John Coltrane's music, which is like the Mona Lisa of jazz, you know, paintings, however you want to say it, like why, like the old saying, why repaint the Mona Lisa? And then I realized, well, these people sucked because I had been in a bad car accident. I was listening to a lot of Coltrane and I used similar titles, but there's nothing even remotely like those songs. Those songs are not the Coltrane melodies. They're totally our take on what kind of the vibe of those original songs were. So like, I mean, you know, they're not even like, we didn't even, you know, attribute any of them to John Coltrane because you can call an instrumental song whatever you want to call it. So I said, this is like John Coltrane's like truly his positive energy that he was putting out, and in a different way. That's what we're trying to do, more on a spiritual, bigger level, but the songs have nothing to do with anything.
Listening to like Love Supreme, you know, back and forth to Love Supreme Collective, it's like you listen to classical music that's this, you know, great composition. It's really fluid and it's got a lot of emotion. And then you put on like Iron Maiden and it's like heavy metal blaring through your ears. It's like that's what that feels like. And you get this beast of a feeling when you hear Love Supreme Collective. It's like a completely different emotion.
It's 100% different. And it'd be like, you know, is Metallica better or is the Chicago Symphony Orchestra better? Anyone who gives an answer to that and says one's better than the other is a complete fucking idiot because they're both amazing, but you can't compare the two. They're totally different things. So to me, you know, if somebody was trying to compare the record that we made with another record that really has no musical comparison, I already realized those people didn't get it out of the gate, and there's no way you're going to force them to. They would have to like listen to other music for the next 40 years and maybe wrap their head around it even, I would think. But what was weird about that is because it was so yin and yang, people either loved it or hated it. And so many of Jimmy's friends like loved it because it was more balls out for sure than, you know, people were expecting. Then that kind of, I think, excited both me and Jimmy to do another record because it was just going to be that one, and you know, that's it. So then we're talking about what should we do, and I love the song God's Gonna Cut You Down. Obviously it's an old gospel song, but I really love the Johnny Cash version of it, and I always have. And it was just like in my head and it wasn't leaving. So then I said to Jimmy, I'm like, cool, you know, for the next one, I really want to do God's Gonna Cut You Down. And can you come up with a cool drum groove? And he came up with something I never would have expected for that. And it's got a whole different vibe. And I'm like, let's do it with a Hammond B3 organ player. So I called my friend Demos. And it's largely because I used to play with the Hammond B3 organ guys. And I like really let, you know, 15 or so years go by without playing with Hammond B3 guys, just because I'd done it so much as a young person is as much as I love it, I just didn't want to for a while. And so the God's Gonna Cut You Down album, I think for me was the first album where I felt like I truly was blending stuff that I love from when I first started playing the saxophone to songs that I like and musicians that I like. And it was, I feel, the best culmination of me as a musician at that time. I think it was like 2014 or 2015 when we recorded it. But I was very proud of it.
I do remember someone in Bloomington kind of being like, oh my God, I love the show. It was amazing. Which album should I buy? And I'm really partial to that one just because they're all amazing, but that one was totally a favorite. And I do remember telling them, this is the gothist album here, and you should probably take interest in it. And they're like, okay, cool. It's like the goth version of jazz, and it's just so different and cool.
And Great Time, specifically that album, when it comes on the radio, if I'm driving, I got the jazz station on, or Club Lucky, where I like to hang out with, they have it in the jukebox. Whenever anything from that album comes on, I'm very proud of it. And I can't say that about everything. I can say that everything I've ever done was the very best that I could do at the time and with what I had to work with. But not everything that I've done, when I hear it now, am I as proud of. And I really, really like that album. And then that was, I feel like, also then the catalyst for the Bye Bye Blackbird album that we did with David Sanborn on it. And then because those did well, we got asked to go do the tour of Japan. And then that's how Tokyo Number 9 came about. So it's hard for me to answer, with a simple answer, but I'll just say they all had kind of like a natural succession because of what had just happened prior. So obviously, if we didn't get to go to Japan, you can't do a live in Japan album.
Frank, I have a question. It's probably a lot easier for you. So say when you were 18, you got there at 5 o'clock when they shut down, right? Your first record deal that you signed that day with no guidance. If you would have been 2 minutes too late and you wouldn't have got that deal, with a name like Frank Catalano, do you think you would have joined the Chicago Mafia?
Well, I think that, I have enough friends and family that may or may not be involved with stuff. It probably wouldn't be too hard for me to, on some level, have some involvement. And I've had people ask questions about that. And obviously, I've never been involved with, anything of that nature. But
he's not in waste management.
Yeah, I should start Tony Soprano's waste management.
Got some concrete companies.
But the person that used to own Birdland, the building, Joe Catalano, who was a notorious mobster, and I think maybe that's why the current owner Gianni likes me, who's also Italian. And so there's probably something there. And actually, I'm quite certain, just doing some family tracing stuff, I really do think that the Joe Catalano that did own the building that became Birdland, I do think that he was the brother of my great grandfather. And the only living relative that's in the almost 100-year ballpark is my aunt, that's a Catalano, is my Aunt Phyllis. And she says yes, but now, unfortunately, she's in a nursing home and her health isn't good. But she has all these papers from Sicily and all this stuff. And she gave some to me and she's like, I have more. But so she is the last person, that was born in Sicily, that's a Catalano, that has access to all this stuff. A lot of it's in Italian and it's scribbly looking handwriting and it's hard, but birth certificates, other things. So I think it could be found out, but I'm quite certain that I am a very distant relative of him. So there is obviously in my family, there's been some goofy stuff.
So you're in the family, basically.
I on some level, even though not me personally, but yeah, definitely distant family members obviously had some involvement in organized crime without question. At least that's what I've been able to surmise.
Can you talk a little bit about Birdland, your new album that's out, that just recently came out and is such a feat of, kind of define what happened with COVID and when it was recorded, and just tell us a little bit about the new album.
Well, I got real lucky. My former booking agent, Eric Hansen, introduced me to Ryan Patternite, who's the manager of Birdland. And then Ryan introduced me to Gianni, who's the owner of Birdland, and Ryan and Gianni started managing me for a while under Birdland Artists Group, and they had Ravi Coltrane, they had Farrell Sanders. Farrell Sanders is awesome, and not only did he record with John Coltrane, but Farrell Sanders, album Creator Has a Master Plan, is one of my favorites of all time. So I was very honored to be part of that group. And, you know, Ryan is like, yeah, let's do a live from Birdland album. So we recorded about 8 shows in 2019 that were done at Birdland. And we were going to release it in 2020, but I put the brakes on because I'm like, well, why put out an album if you can't tour behind it and whatnot? I should have said, yeah, let's put it out, because unfortunately it's just now coming out over 2 years after the fact. So I feel, unfortunately, 2 years of my career and or at least recording career was kind of lost. And I feel a little bad about that, but I'm glad that it is now finally coming out. Unfortunately, Ryan and Gianni are not my managers anymore, and they closed down their Birdland artist arm. But I'm happy that the club is back, has reopened and is doing well. And I did just play there last month, and, you know, it's great. But I'm super proud of it. And I kind of feel like this is probably the last more mainstream album that I'm going to make for some time. And the fact that I got to do it at Birdland, where so many legendary people, I mean, like Count Basie live at Birdland, John Coltrane's live at Birdland album is one of my all-time favorites. So I just feel like it was a big honor to be able to do it, and to do it with a lot of my favorite musicians. Drummer Mike Clark, was in Herbie Hancock's Headhunters, forever, and everybody's heard his playing, whether they know it or not. And Randy Ingram and Julian Smith, they're kind of like my regular New York band whenever I'm in New York. And so I'm definitely very proud of it. And I'm glad that it did finally come out, even if it's a couple years later than I had hoped. But during COVID, I had already kind of started, writing some different things and thinking a little bit different ways. So it's weird for me to kind of put that on hold, because I put the Birdland release on hold. And again, if I would have known it was going to be on hold for over 2 years, I would have in 2020 just said, let's release it now. But I am glad it's coming out, and I just hope everyone gets a chance to check it out. And even if you don't, buy any CDs or vinyls or whatever, with everything being on Spotify and Apple Music, go ahead and just listen to it, and I sure appreciate it.
Stream it now. Highly recommend. Even people who don't like jazz have commented that it's really good. So just give it a shot. It's amazing.
I definitely feel that it's a shame that in the United States, especially, but everywhere, I guess, but especially in the United States, because of marketing reasons and old school radio station formats and stuff, everything gets pigeonholed. So I don't like the fact that things are very much now either rock or jazz or blues. Like, I wish it could just be like good music, or maybe good instrumental music. And I say that this is, that's the way of things in the United States and not everywhere. I kind of say that because when my Mighty Burner album came out in Japan, and I would get like the playlists, there was so many stations there that they would play like Janet Jackson, Frank Catalano, some Japanese pop band that I wasn't familiar with, but I liked. It was like the DJ at a powerful radio station had the ability to say, I really like this, and that's why I want to play it. And I know more like in the 40s, 50s, 60s, earlier on in the United States, it was that way. But then it kind of got much more, category oriented. This is the hard rock station. This is the jazz station. This is the classical station. This is the country station. And so I really wish that people wouldn't call jazz so much as just like, hey, this is some cool music. I understand that's probably never going to happen because people do like to, put things in a category. But I feel like jazz in general has kind of been like marginalized and pushed off to the side when a lot of people would really like it. I know even during the Smashing Pumpkins live stream thing, I saw some of the comments on the side, and so many people were excited and maybe haven't even heard saxophone much before. And that kind of blew my mind. But then it made sense. It's like, well, in current times, how many famous rock bands have a bunch of saxophone? Saxophone, like in the 50s, and a lot of like early rock stuff was prevalent, but it's really not utilized much anymore. So that's something else that just kind of surprised me. So, but yeah, I really wish if I had a magic wand, which I don't, but I really wish that there'd be a way for when it came down to promoting things, that jazz wouldn't get marginalized to the few jazz publications that are out there, and it would be widely talked about. I think in some ways that might be changing, and I think in some ways Spotify, streaming services do help, but even they kind of follow the old school traditional radio formats of, if you like John Coltrane, then maybe you'll like Miles Davis. And if you like Miles Davis, maybe you'll like, Frank Catalano or whatever it might be. But I really wish it would just be like, here's a bunch of cool music. So why couldn't it be like, hey, if you like something that's hard hitting, if you like Metallica, then listen to, Frank Catalano's Love Supreme with Jimmy Chamberlain from the Smashing Pumpkins and Chris Poland from Megadeth. Like, I wish it could be that type of algorithm, because I think that would be more beneficial to people that love music, and they would discover some cool new stuff. As where I feel like, unfortunately, even though you can discover cool new stuff with the streaming services, it's like once it gets into that jazz quick category, it doesn't leave that. It just kind of stays there, and only people searching out jazz might stumble upon it. As where if it could be more of a mainstream, category, or if we could get rid of the categories, it would help. But again, that's a whole nother conversation, I suppose.
It's all good. It's just
It's
good
all
vibes,
good.
good music.
Yeah, it's all good.
Frank, you spent over an hour with us, and it was enlightening to hear everything. And I'm sure I know there's more to tell. There was questions on here I had, but I'm like, we're kind of at our mark here.
Is there one specific question?
I have one specific question that I have to ask. A friend of mine from Chicago, she's out there, she's listening. I think she's setting me up to get in trouble with you, so I apologize in advance. She wants to know, what is the deal with putting ketchup on a hot dog?
Well, in Chicago, you never do it. You would probably have mustard. A Chicago dog would probably be like mustard, a little bit of onions, maybe a little bit of relish, maybe a couple of sport peppers, maybe a little bit of tomato, but it would definitely have maybe a little celery salt. It would definitely have mustard and not ketchup. And that is, unfortunately, living in Chicago, there's a lot of very good tasting, but not good for you type foods. And a traditional Chicago hot dog would be one of them. And a deep dish pizza would be another one. And maybe like Al's Beef, or one of the famous like Italian beef type places. They're all really good. But yeah, they are pretty brutal. I'm supposed to play some concerts in Singapore coming up, and a friend of mine from Singapore came out, and I took him out to eat twice. And one was a French restaurant. They loved it. The food was very clean, called Oblex. My buddy Oliver owns it and is a chef. It's great. One was Club Lucky. Had martinis, food, great. Cool. But they wanted like a traditional Chicago experience. So they went to like Lou Malnati's Pizza and something else. And they said that, the week that they were in Chicago, they gained 15 pounds. I'm like, yeah,
well worth
it happens. But yeah, it's funny.
I'm a big Bears fan, and every year I always order those. Would you say they're called Lou Malnati?
Oh, Lou Malnati's Pizza. It's pretty classic.
I order there. They'll send you pizzas like frozen. You know what I mean, like in coolers.
Oh, okay.
Expensive, but I do like once a year usually. I'm a big Bears fan, so for whatever game we picked throughout the season, we'll make some of those deep dish pizzas, and they're phenomenal.
I mean, they really are fun, but yeah, you have to know what you're getting into, I suppose, because they're definitely intense, but they are fun. And of course, like, talking about the Bears, like obviously all those Saturday Night Live skits over the years with Chris Farley and all that stuff, I think it was like usually like Italian beef sandwiches that they'd be eating with
When
one
he has his heart
hand,
attack.
and then like
His third heart attack. Yeah.
I mean, so not to make too much fun of it, but I mean, that's
I dressed up as that Chris Farley character for Halloween a couple years ago. I'll shoot you a message on Facebook of that. It's pretty hilarious.
Oh my God.
Well,
that's
I
so
think
funny.
that wraps it up. I think we end on a high note with that. And
Yes.
and Frank, thank you so much for jumping on. And like I said, I know there's so much more that we could certainly get into, and maybe we do get that, maybe, travel around the world a little bit, a lot of this COVID restrictions and stuff. CDC, I think, released some stuff today, at least for the United States, where there's a lot less restrictions.
I mean, I'm real happy about that because, our whole tour of France that happened in April, which was supposed to happen in April 2020, 2 years later happened, but it was awesome and everyone's so nice. So I think, knock on wood, we're in good shape now. And thanks for having me on the podcast. It was fun blabbing. And of course, me and Carmen are good friends, but it was nice getting to chill out and hang out and become friends.
You're an honorary Chusky boy, Frank.
I feel that way, I feel that way.
Keep it Chusky.
I think I'm gonna make Chusky my nickname from
There you
now
go.
on.
We love it.
Chusky
Catalano.
Frank.
Think about
I like
us. Think about us.
I like it. It's
Stickers.
It's Billy Corgan asked me if I had a nickname, and I said no. He's like, we need to find you one, and I'm like, yeah, let's get a cool one. And he's like, I got to think about it. And I think I'm gonna say Chusky because I like
That's it.
I like Frank Chusky Catalano.
There
I
you
think
go.
That's
Yeah,
it.
it's got a ring
That's
to it.
FCC right there.
You got to know the
FCC.
history. All right, Frank, you got to know the history where that came about. Okay. So I'm going to ask you a couple questions. Okay. I understand you're probably not going to know the answer, and that's fine. Okay. But now, Dusty, it's been a while. So we've been on hiatus for a while.
I might
okay?
forget. It's been a few Long Island iced teas since I've answered this.
All right. So Frank, if you're not chubby and you're not husky, well, what the hell are you?
What could it be?
I mean, Chusky sounds
Damn
pretty
right.
cool.
That's it.
Damn right. Nailed
yeah.
it 1 for 1, 100%.
Set you up and you knocked it down.
I like it. I think it's a good it's a fun, derogatory description. And it's fun. So I like it.
That's all. Hey, that's what we're all about. Not
all love.
derogatory, having some fun, talking about music. That's really what it comes down to.
You're the man, Frank.
Okay,
Cheers
well,
to you,
look forward to
Frank.
hanging out soon. Thanks so much.
Talk
And
soon,
have a
Frank.
good night.
Have a good night, man.
Night.
Bye, Frank.
All right, episode 24 in the books.
24.
Frank Catalano. I mean, I don't know. I thought I don't think it was. He was amazing to come from however many months. I think last episode we had was back in April, and to come back here in August to have him join and talk about his experiences and stuff like that.
So freely and so cool.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, we could have gone for another hour and a half.
That's amazing. Yeah.
We didn't even talk about his injury and his patent that he had.
Right.
And other...
He's one. Let him travel the world a little bit with some of these COVID restrictions being dropped, stuff like that. Let's have him back on. Let's talk about some more of those
He's
things.
the best.
Yeah. I mean, it was engaging. Just very, very, very. I mean, yeah, very good. You didn't kind of squirrel off or anything. You were just engaged in his conversation, and those are the guests that we're looking for. So, Sketchy Goat, thank you so much. I know you've done a lot of his posters. When I was doing a little bit of prep for the interview and stuff, I'm like, that's Sketchy Goat. That's Sketchy Goat. You know what I mean? Like, you just see your art.
I got to put
everywhere,
together his
man.
last
It's
album.
everywhere. You got Sean
Yeah,
Kinney's Drumhead
he's the
on the new tour.
Hang on. Hey, whoa, pause.
John
I think. Hey, stop. I think that's a big deal that I don't want to talk over you, Dusty. So
Well, you
go
already
ahead.
did.
What did you just say about the Alice in Chains tour and
On a
Sketchy
separate
Goat?
note.
She's blushing. She doesn't want to say it. Look at
Well,
her.
I thought you were gonna say it.
Facebook
'cause-
famous, damn it, right? So the drumhead,
I can't say it.
Sean
You gotta
Kinney.
say it.
which is the Alice in Chains drummer, right? Everybody knows that. Everybody listening to this podcast better know that, right? You better study up on your shit.
Who is Alice and why is she in chains?
Right. What are we talking about? So did the drum, not the drum, the drum head. No, what is it called? The drum.
It is a kick drum head is what it's been referred to as. And this is the very first time Sean has not designed this pretty much himself. The first time they've kind of outsourced someone to do an image. And if you look, you might see some different images later on. So I'll leave that there too.
That's cool.
Oh.
See that? I mean,
Yeah.
hey, that is some big time
The
stuff.
Chusky boys have got
And
you
of
to
his-
the top, huh?
And yes, this I got everything that I know from here. No, but it was also really cool because this was one of his heroes growing up. It's Charlie Watts. I mean, you don't get more iconic than the Rolling Stones.
Check out the socials. It's posted. It is known. The tour started yesterday. Dusty and I are seeing him on the 27th of August. Do you have an opportunity to see him on this tour or
yeah,
not?
Phoenix and Albuquerque.
Phoenix
making the
and
trek.
Albuquerque. Hell
Kirky,
yeah.
we're going to Kirky, man.
Don't talk
Duke
about
City.
Kirky. You don't talk about Kirky.
Worktown. I might actually go see him in Minnesota on the
Minnesota.
25th. I'm looking at Minnesota. I'm looking
25th
at that.
and then coming back to 27th. You're crazy, dude. You're crazy, man. Hey,
You're
in that
crazy.
sweet Dodge Neon, we'll talk about that in another episode. That's awesome, man.
Neon
Hey,
LOL, yo.
That's right. Don't
Episode
make fun of it.
24 in
There
the
it
books.
is.
I've missed talking with you guys, but this is fantastic. And we will talk with everybody soon. Otherwise, have a good night. Dusty, what do you got to say?
Peace.